Here's a really cool scythe made by the Isaiah Blood Company of Ballston Spa, New York. Sometime in the 19th century, this company operated in one form or another from about 1831 to 1901. The factory burned down a couple times. It was sold once, and yeah, it's old. It's surprisingly lightweight considering its large profile, and when we start to look very close, we can see why. It is remarkably thin. The blade itself tapers from about 1/16 down to an apex. I mean, wow, it's like a huge chef knife, and boy, is it warped. There's the cool maker's mark. It's so thin, I'm curious as to how sharp it is in its rusted state, so let's check it out. I mean, it sort of cuts paper, but I don't think it's sharp. I think it's just big and sort of muscling its way through the paper. I'll prove how sharp it isn't on my arm. Watch this. Boom. So if we're going to make a knife out of this, and that's what we're here to do, I need to know if the steel can be hardened. We don't want to make any assumptions. The steel might not be hardenable beyond 50 HRC, for example. 50 HRC is the right hardness for something that cuts grass and hits rocks all day, but it would be too soft for a knife blade. So let's get rid of some of this rust and check hardness with these hardness files. Everywhere we look here, it's going to be about 40 HRC. That's pretty soft. I mean, that's just not going to cut it. It's hard to believe this is only 40 HRC, so I'm going to try to harden it myself with a water quench and see what we come up with. It's just not a good tool at 40 HRC. I don't buy that. So at this point, I've ground off a little bit more, and it's sort of interesting. It seems to be harder at the edge than it is in other spots. And now we're getting somewhere. This might be starting to make a little more sense. So if we spark test, the results are a little bit variable. Some areas seem to spark pretty well. Some areas don't spark as well. Look at that. That's some nice sparking. But that, that's sort of marginal. Let's etch it and see what happens. All right, so I don't know if you can see this, but I heat treated the entire tip from here up. And there's a dark strip right here, and then it gets cut off in here because we ground it away. And it comes around here, and it goes right down through there. And what's interesting is that this 55 HRC file digs in everywhere except that strip, which is really weird. So I don't know if that's part of the construction. They had a hardened piece of steel all the way around like a ring. If they case hardened something, I don't know. It's just weird. And it digs in here too. So it's such a strange result that I don't really trust it. So I'm going to cut off a piece of this. All right, so I lost a bunch of footage there. I apologize. This is basically a cross-sectional area. It's what I decided to do. But check it out. It's been etched. What do you see? You see a high carbon, dark etching area in the middle with mild steel around it. And that is amazing. And they made this as a flat piece and then pressed it into this shape, obviously. But, I mean, that's phenomenal. This is 125 years old, guys. This is what they were doing that long ago. This is the type of sophistication they were employing in industry. And I think that is fairly remarkable, Probably doesn't surprise some of you, but man, this just geeks me out looking at this. It's just amazing to me. I just can't get over how fascinating that is. It turns out back in the day there were two main types of scythes. The so-called continental scythes, which were produced in primarily Austria and some parts of Europe, and then the Anglo-American style scythe made in Britain and America. The continental or Austrian scythe was hand-forged from a single piece of steel, wafer-thin proportions, kept the scythe extra lightweight. We're going to pause here because there's a split opening up in our metal. It's old, it's used. There's just going to be some stressed areas, and that's part of the game. At any rate, the Anglo-American scythe tended to be either stamped into shape or rough forged and shaped with much grinding. The Anglo-American scythe was often made from different grades of steel, by the way, forge welded together in various ways, and it was typically a little bit heavier.
So our Isaiah Blood Scythe is made in the Anglo-American fashion from mild steel and high carbon steel forged welded together in this case, like San Mai, and then stamped into shape. But it's much like an Austrian style scythe in that it's very thin, very lightweight. I've handled a few other vintage scythes, and this is a very lightweight one. So at this point, I've spent more than a few heats trying to straighten the spine and both axes as well as the blade, and we're starting to lose material to forge scale. This was a very thin blade to begin with, so we have to be careful. Look how thin and warpy we're getting here. So you guys, it was straight, but as we removed material, it started to warp again. So I'm just going to grind it down to its final profile and start straightening it again and see where we get. So as I'm grinding, I can see the edge just moving sort of side to side. And here's why it kept bending. There's a thin spot on the steel that got even thinner with the loss of material due to forge scale and forging. So it pushes one way, then the other, and you can basically see through it.
This is what we got left. Not a lot. It's got mild steel on the outside and a thin little, or decarburized rusted steel on the outside, and a thin little carbon steel core. We might be able to hammer this cold into shape and not have to worry about heating it, forging it, losing more material. It's already so thin. Even if we successfully, heat it up and straighten it, I'm still going to have to heat treat it at that point, and we're surely going to introduce some more warps and steel this thin, or at least we risk that. So wouldn't it be cool if we don't have to do any heat treating at all? We can just straighten this out with a hammer and leave it as it is. Let's give it a shot.
So we are going to get another scythe and revisit that initial idea of trying to preserve the handle. But for now, let's move on to another method of working this metal and making a knife. All right, I'll put a handle on this and we'll look at the final result here in a minute. But first, our second Isaiah Blood Scythe has arrived. So let's see what we can do with that. So you're looking at this and you're saying, yeah, heating it up ruins the heat treatment. So what did you learn? And yeah, we have to heat it up, ruin the heat treatment, and we're going to have to reheat treat it, but we're not going to do a whole lot of straightening before the heat treat. We're going to get it sort of straight. We're not going to spend a lot of time in the fire thinning everything out. We're just going to heat treat it, and then we're going to bang it straight after that. We're just not going to spend a lot of time accruing forge scale and making it unusable. I can't hammer on the edge side to straighten the spine, right? Which is normally what I would do. It's just too thin. So I have to sort of attack it from the spine side, and it's just not getting anywhere. So I'm going to spine whack it and see if we can get it a little bit straighter. I mean, I think it works a little bit, but we're paying a price. Check this out. Yeah, the spine opened up. It's separating from the rest of the blade. So I'm going to have to cut that off. And then we're just going to have to straighten this out as best we can. Heat treat it and bang it straight. Cold work it and make something. So pre-heat treat, it's actually pretty straight. It's been normalized forge side a couple times now. We're going to put it in Parks 50. Then we're going to temper it at 365 degrees. And then we'll have to straighten things out with the hammer after that. I'm sure it's going to warp a little bit. And are we going to get both the spine and the blade perfectly straight? You know, probably not. But we're going to favor the blade over the spine. And that's just the way it's going to go. All right, this is a picture after sharpening. Is the best I can do. It looks pretty straight. It actually turned out pretty straight, so I'm not unhappy with that. Hear that awesome ringing? I just put a grinder belt finish on this. I might go back and do a hand sanded finish. I haven't decided. And the maker's mark is still legible, so that's pretty cool. Now, do I wish it looked like that? Yeah, I do, but it doesn't, so we're just going to live with it. And that's where you're wrong, Steve-O. We got an old Austria brand scythe that etches like it's a monosteel construction on this cross section, and it sparks pretty good too. It hardened to 60 HRC, but the heat treat will need some more tinkering because this edge is just not as refined or long lasting as the Isaiah Blood Knives. It's not bad, but it could be better given how well it hardened. Speaking of the Isaiah Blood Knives, let's get back to our first blade. Now it's got a handle. I distressed the copper a bit to match the blade. You know, this was a fun project. I learned a lot. What do you guys think?